All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the week one training. Um, this is our single camera script formatting week. The reason we have this single camera script formatting in week one of our class is because an important thing to remember about single camera script formatting is that it's mostly used for our TV dramas. So in your minds, correlate our TV dramas with single camera. And I'll reiterate this a couple times throughout the class because it's kind of one of the most important takeaways I want you to glean from the class is the difference between single camera and multi-camera and what they're used for. So tonight we're talking about single camera. Before we get really deep into things, our agenda for the evening is we'll do introductions, we'll discuss some week one reminders, then we'll get into single camera script formatting. Then we'll talk about spec writing and writing original pilots. And then we'll talk about some TV drama writing techniques that you can use. So first, introductions. I'm your instructor, Julianne White. I've been with Full Sail for about 5 years. I started out teaching the literary research class, which is no longer in the program. It's been replaced by this class, which is really exciting and I hope you'll get a lot out of. And my background is in television and film development. I'm also a writer as well. And I write children's books and web series and screenplays and teleplays. So if you have questions on screenwriting or writing for television, writing for the web, or reality TV, hopefully I can answer any of your questions on those this month. Typically, my office hours are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. But other days, I'm happy to meet with you if you make an appointment. I do check my email all day long, so if you have a question and you want to just jot a quick email to me, I'm usually pretty quick about getting back to you with it. Alternately, if I'm not in the office, feel free to contact me, like I said, via email. You can try me on the office phone during office hours, or you can try me at my alternate phone, which is 818-732-0076. When I'm not in the office, just be conscious that that is my personal cell phone. And so I'm giving that to you guys as a courtesy, just so if you have a question when I'm out of the office and you're waiting on a response from me via email, or if it's an emergency, you can get a hold of me via my cell phone. Just I ask that everybody respect, business hours, and that I'm in Eastern time zone at the moment. So yeah, and also if you're on Skype, you can try to Skype me at Julie White as my username. Couple of quick announcements. The first thing I want to make sure everybody's aware of is the No Good Deeds web series. This is what we're doing on the discussion boards in this class. Our department is collaborating with the film production MFA department here on campus to get the web series produced. We've already shot the first 3 episodes. And what we're doing is that from each cohort of students coming out of this class, 1 or more scripts will be selected to go into the pool of available spec scripts for the film production students to produce. So by participating in the discussion boards this month, your spec script is up for consideration for the opportunity. I'll make sure that I notify all writers whose scripts are selected, and our student episodes begin shooting in either April or May. So it's a really exciting opportunity because you could all be graduating with production credits. So all of you have that opportunity. And it should be pretty fun. I think a lot of people have really enjoyed working on it. And even if your episode isn't produced, you'll still get the experience of kind of workshopping ideas together and speccing for an existing series. A couple of due date reminders. This Friday, your first post to discussion number 1 are due. This includes your analysis of the web series and your 3 to 5 springboards. And springboards, they're basically just 1 or 2 sentences describing your episode. They're a little different than log lines, so you don't have to feel constricted to the logline formula that you've been shown. But it's basically just a pitch for an episode of the web series. So based on what you read from the episodes and what you kind of determine is our series premise, you'll pitch me an idea that you think would fit. And then based on those, we'll approve you to proceed with a springboard for next week to kind of take to the next stage of development. And then on Sunday, your response posts to discussion one, there are two peer responses that you'll have to do for discussion one. Your assignment one will also be due, as well as your thesis status submission. Now that is just, you're sending me a copy of your thesis as of where you were with it at the end of your last class. So you don't have to add any more to your script just yet. That's going to be your week 4 assignment, but that's just to help me measure your progress. And while I'm not going to be grading your thesis status submissions or giving notes on them, what I will do is just kind of scan them and see if I notice any formatting errors you might be having or anything that we can kind of flag as an issue before you get too much further into the script. And then finally, you'll want to make sure that you have reviewed or that you attend tonight's go-to training, and your lessons 1 and 2 will also be required to be completed by Sunday. So those are the due date reminders. And now, if any of you have any questions or concerns before we get started with the rest of tonight's lecture, now is a good time for us to pause and we can ask. Okay, like I said, throughout the evening, if you have any questions, you can either interject, or if you want to just type it into the chat window when there's a good pause, I can answer your question. Alternately, if you think of something you want to ask after tonight's lecture, feel free to email me and I will be happy to get back to you. Okay, so let's talk about single camera script formatting. This is predominantly used when you're writing for our TV shows. But sometimes the single camera format can be used for half-hour sitcoms that are shot using a single camera. We're hearing a little bit of background noise, so I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody's mic. So if you do have a question, just use the chat window. So single camera versus multi-camera. Multi-camera, you want to imagine that it's being filmed sort of like a live theater performance where you have one camera on one side of the stage and another camera on a different portion of the stage, both picking up different portions of the action, but the action playing out continuously before the cameras without a whole lot of cuts being called. Single camera, on the other hand, is when things are shot film style, where there's one camera that's used, it shoots a particular angle, then cut is called, the camera moves, it picks up the action from another angle, and then those pieces are completely assembled in post-production, and they make your scene. So the scene doesn't run all the way through typically in a single shot. Sometimes it can, but only one camera is used in single camera script format. The way you can tell the difference between the two is that single camera tends to look very cinematic. There's typically, it affords you the opportunity to have more dramatic lighting. You can take the camera with you places. So there's a lot more location shooting, things like that. Whereas multi-camera, because it's typically shot on a sound stage, sometimes in front of a live studio audience, there's always one wall that we won't see. And the lighting tends to be pretty even and flat, because that way, with two cameras rolling at the same time, they don't have to worry about any shadows that don't match between the two cameras. So multi-camera shoots are typically only ever used for half-hour sitcoms, whereas single camera script format is mostly used for hour TV dramas, but it can sometimes be used for half hour. So that's a brief little introduction about the difference. But this week we're working on our TV dramas, which are in this single camera format. So we're going to take a look at single camera formatted scripts and how do you set them up. So first thing we got to do is we have to open Final Draft. And what you'll notice when you open Final Draft is it automatically defaults to the last type of document that you had open. In this case, the last thing I had open was a graphic novel, so it opened me up to a blank graphic novel template. That's not what we want. So we want to make sure we go under the File menu, we select New from Template, and then we navigate into the TV templates, and we choose 1 hour TV drama. And like I said, most 1 hour TV dramas are single camera, and all half-hour sitcoms, well, most half-hour sitcoms are multi-camera. Some are 1 hour, some half-hour sitcoms are shot single camera. For the single camera sitcoms like Modern Family and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you would draft those in a 1 hour TV drama template. So it's a little bit confusing when you're choosing your template in Final Draft, but just try to remember that half-hour sitcom is synonymous with multi-camera, and 1 hour TV drama, this template here, is synonymous with single camera. So if we're setting up a single camera script, we want to choose 1 hour TV drama and click New. That'll open us up into our new 1 hour TV drama. So the way you can tell at a glance if you're in a single camera TV template is there's 2 different ways. The first way is by clicking this Elements panel in the bottom of your Final Draft browser window. You'll see that, like a screenplay, it has a bunch of elements, but there's some below cast list here that you will not find in a screenplay template. There's New Act, End of Act, Teaser/Act 1, and Show Episode Title. Now these are important because especially when you're setting up your script for your No Good Deeds spec, you'll need to be using these particular elements. So the first thing we want to do in our single camera script is we want to set up our Show Episode Title element. Now this is in addition to the information that goes on the title page. So we'll click Show Episode Title, and you can see that that takes us to the center of the page. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to kind of show you. Oops, that's a little too big. Oh, this. Okay, so we're in the center of the page. So Show Episode Title, let's say we're writing our No Good Deeds spec. So that's our show title, and on the next line, if we want to start Teaser Act 1, we can do that, or if we want to add the episode title, we'll also select Show/Episode Title element, and we'll type in our episode, so maybe we're calling it Lucky Day. When we hit return from this line, it's going to take us to the next element, which is Teaser/Act 1. So you always want to have your act elements before your scene begins. So here I would write Act 1, and when I'm done with that, I hit return, and that takes me to the next line, which is a scene heading. And from here, you're just going to write your scene like you normally would in a screenplay. You've got your slug line, or it's called the scene heading element. They're also called slug lines, so those are synonymous. Then you'd write your action. Then you can write your character and your dialogue. Parentheticals look exactly the same as in film. Just like that. And then when you're done writing your scene, you can go on to the next scene. But when you finish an act, what you need to do is make sure you change the element, because if you're on a line of dialogue, let's see my scene is over and I'm ready to start the next scene. But it's in Act 2. From here, what I want to do is on the next line, once I've hit return, I want to change the action elements to End of Act, and then I'll write End of Act 1. Now what happens when I write End of Act 1 and hit return is that I'm automatically bumped down to start the next act at the beginning of the next page. So this is a big difference between film and TV as well. So I'll make my pages a little bit smaller here so you can see what this looks like. See the amount of page difference. So no matter if I ended my first act in the middle of the page or near the top of the page, after I've set up my end of act element, if I hit return, it's automatically going to put me on a new act element, which starts us on a new page. So that's kind of important to know. Additionally, another thing, if you wanted to change, you've got Teaser Act 1. If you hit New Act, that's going to bump you down to the next page. So Act 1, you want to make sure gets set as an Act 1 element. so that it stays on the first page of your script. Matthew says, so it's kind of like graphic novels. Yes, exactly. So in a graphic novel, which we'll learn about in week 3, in comics, each time you start a new book page of your graphic novel or your comic, you'll also want to start on a new page of your manuscript. So TV does have that in common. So that's the basic way that you will set these up. The big things to keep in mind are your act headings and your end of act elements. They're exclusive to television scripts, and so we should see them called out in your screenplay for your teleplay. Another way you can change the elements, or if you want to double check that something's set correctly, you can put your cursor on any line of your script. Make it a little bigger to see. Put your cursor on any line of the script. Then you can go up to the Format menu and scroll down to Change Element To, and this will list all the elements just the same way. So just like this drop-down menu here, it gives you all the elements that are listed. Now, whatever way you decide you want to change it or check it, whatever item is check marked, that is the element whatever your line is set to be. So, for example, if I'm on this character element right here, I can check and see it says it's a character element, so I know I've properly formatted that. If my end of act element is set incorrectly, let's say I've put it as a shot element and I need to change it, all I have to do is then go to either drop down menu and choose the correct element. Another important thing that you want to keep in mind is, let's say we've written a screenplay in a completely different template. So I'm going to open right now for you a script that's written in multi-camera. We'll get more into the differences between multi-camera and single camera next week. But you can see right now, because our action is in all caps, the dialogue is double spaced, this does not look like what we were just working on. So we know automatically that we're not in the same template because it looks different. So you can also check here to see, does it have different elements? And the way we can tell the difference here between the multi-camera and the single camera script is because the multi-camera has the cold opening option, whereas in our single camera template, there is no element for cold open. It's the teaser / act 1. So that's another difference between, sorry about that, single camera and multi-camera scripts, is that in our dramas for single camera, the first little bit that comes before the credits, usually the brief intro scene, is called a teaser, where in most sitcoms it's called a cold open. So that's a difference to keep in mind as well. So those are the basics. But let's say we're back into this improperly formatted script. How can we get it in the right script without having to retype the entire thing? So what we would want to do is, our cursor can be anywhere in the script, but then we go up to the Format menu and we choose Elements. From Elements, you can choose Apply a Template. Now you want to scroll all the way down to the bottom so we can find that 1 hour TV drama template, which is, as we know, is our single camera TV template. We'll click that and then hit OK. And voila, our action is now properly lowercase for the most part. Our dialogue is now single spaced instead of double spaced. So it looks like it's supposed to look. Another thing you may notice if you're writing a spec episode of something is that some TV shows have underlined slug lines. So the way you can underline your slug lines, or if they have their act elements in bold, or if there's some specific thing that a particular show chooses to do as part of their script formatting, really easy to do. To underline the scene heading, you'll highlight the scene heading with your cursor. Then either by going to the Format menu and choosing Underline. Oops, that is not the one I wanted. File. underline. By choosing underline, it then underlines it. The other way you can do it is, let's say I want to underline something. You can also hit the command button plus the letter U. So that's a quick keyboard shortcut that, if you remember, can be really helpful. So it's the command button plus the letter U. The same thing works with the bold option. If you see something in the script, the series you're speccing, and you want to put your act headings in bold, or if they have their slug lines in bold, the way you can do that is either by going up to Format, Style, and choosing Bold, or you can hit Command plus the letter B for bold. So it's pretty easy. Those are the basic elements of your single camera TV script, and we covered how to apply a template, and we also covered up setting our act breaks. Before I get further along, does anybody have any questions on setting up act breaks or applying templates or finding elements? I'm going to open up the mics just in case anybody does. All right. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? Okay, cool. So the next thing we're going to talk about is spec writing. Spec writing is when you're writing, it has a little different reference, used a little bit differently in television than it's used in feature film writing. In feature film, if you write a script that no one paid you to do, you're just writing a sample script and you hope to sell it. That's called a spec script. In television, if you write a spec, yeah, if you write something original, it is an original spec, but spec is more often used in television to mean when you're writing a sample episode of an existing show that no one's paid you for. And you're usually using these as writing samples to get you more work. So reasons you may have a spec script for an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine or Two and a Half Men is maybe you want to showcase your writing samples. And most work in television isn't going to be from you selling original ideas. It's going to be you getting hired by a production to either write an episode for them or to be part of a writing staff. So what they want to know is that you can capture the essence of a series that someone else has already created and write an episode that's going to embody what a typical episode of that show would be. So let's say you chose the show How to Get Away with Murder as something you wanted to spec. You would write your spec of How to Get Away with Murder, and then you might send it to an agent, not to sell that script to the show, because that will never happen. They won't look at samples that other people have written of their own show, but maybe the writers of Castle will want to take a look at my How to Get Away with Murder script. And they'll say, okay, wow, she really understands this character. She's got really punchy dialogue. We can tell that she understands how to write for a series and that she can write from a world that somebody else has created. So that's the purpose of spec writing. It used to be that you could only break into TV through spec writing. And then television writing went through a phase where you could only break in through writing original specs. Anymore, I definitely recommend to students to have good samples of both, because if you were to apply to, the ABC DGA, the ABC Disney Writing Fellowship, which is a television writing fellowship through ABC Disney, you would need to have both a spec script for a show that was on the air this past year, and you'd also have to have an original pilot. So we want our students to be prepared to write either. So in this class, we're going to cover both. We'll do the spec writing through the web series, and we'll do original ideas through assignment 1, which you can work on this week. The rest of the assignments in the class are designed to kind of help you build off that original idea, or to, if you like, continue developing your thesis instead. So this week, everybody's coming up with an original idea. But next week, you can either build on that original idea to kind of develop a show Bible for it, or you may decide to do the alternate assignments for your thesis. Okay, so back to spec writing. If you decide you want to write a spec, because you want to break into television writing, there's a couple of things you want to do to prepare yourself before you sit down to write. And the big thing is analysis. You want to ask yourself a few questions. First, you want to ask yourself how many acts are in the show. And unlike screenplays where everything is 3 acts regardless, um, television operates on the assumption that an act is where acts are determined by where the commercial breaks are. In produced episodes, you can tell, because it's when they break to commercial. So if you count the number of commercial breaks, you can find out how many acts your show has. And these are dictated by the network. So if you're writing a show for ABC, you'll want to follow ABC's format. So whether it's a spec of an ABC show or whether it's an original pilot that you're hoping to sell to ABC, you'd want to write it. I think ABC's on 6 acts at the moment, but you need to analyze that to break it down. AMC, on the other hand, I think is out of 4 acts. So sometimes you can be specking a show that's 4 acts. Sometimes you might be specking a show that's 5 or 6 or 7 acts. So it's up to you to get copies of the scripts that have been produced if you can. Otherwise, you can just watch the episodes that have been produced and count the commercial breaks. So you need to determine how many acts are in the show. Then you need to determine how long each act is. If all you have access to are the produced episodes of the show that you're watching on TV, you can time them. If you have a DVR, you can pause and get the little the timeline that tells you how far into the episode you are. If you're just watching live television, if you've got a stopwatch or even a watch, count how many minutes they are, because in single camera TV, just like in film, 1 page of script translates to 1 minute of screen time. So if at 12 after the hour we had our first commercial break, we would know that Act 1 was 12 minutes long, and that would translate to 12 pages long. But if you have copies of the script, obviously you can count the pages within the produced scripts that you have. You might also want to use an act chart template like I've provided in Act 1. I'll show you the example of it to kind of break down the times of things. So you could use this to say, okay, so I'm not going to focus on the storylines right now. I'm just going to time everything. And the first scene was from 0 minutes to, let's see, 0 hours, 2 minutes and 26 seconds. So we know that this is a 2-minute, 26-second scene. And then maybe the first scene of Act 1 goes from 2 minutes 26 to 5 minutes on the dot. And then you could just go from there and say, okay, our second scene in Act 1 is from 5 minutes to 7 minutes. It doesn't have to be super precise, but whatever helps you figure that out, it's going to help you determine how long each scene and each act is. The third thing you want to ask yourself is, where are establishing shots used? Now, an establishing shot in TV is an exterior scene that shows the viewer where we are, but contains no narrative action or action involving any of the series characters. It's meant to establish the larger location where we are before we cut inside to interior scenes. So if you think about something like Grey's Anatomy, where they might do the overhead shots of Seattle, that gives us a sense of place, knowing we're in Seattle. Or maybe they'll show us Seattle Grace Hospital from the outside, and then before we go inside to the hospital. The reason they do that is because television, you're always getting some new viewers. So you want to first of all make sure that the new viewers know where the show is taking place. But beyond that, if you already have an established audience, another reason for using establishing shots is because you might be going from a scene set in a room at the hospital to a scene set in a room at Meredith's house. Well, how are we going to know for sure where we are? in place. If the shots are tight or if the rooms are, it's not really clear that they could be both in the hospital or maybe both at Meredith's house, using establishing shots shows us where we are and where we've transitioned to help make sure the reader or the viewer stays oriented with where we are in space and time. So here's an example of an establishing scene. It's exterior Venice Beach establishing day. A typical sunny SoCal day. Vendors peddle their eclectic wares to the bikers, pedestrians, and tourists that pass by. Now, this is kind of vague description in a way because we can't have any description of predominant characters in the scripts, especially if it relates to the narrative of the story. So you want to imagine your establishing shot. You could send out your second camera team to go shoot the exterior of a building. If you have your main characters in an exterior scene, you don't need to then also use an establishing shot because the exterior scene will show us where we are. But if you have your characters involved in that scene, or if any narrative action that's important to the story occurs in your establishing shot, just call it an exterior scene. Don't add establishing to it. But what this does is it allows you to write a quick little scene that shows us where we are. Then once you've figured out if the series uses establishing shots, you want to determine how many plot lines are in an episode. Most shows have multiple plot lines. Now I want to make sure everybody understands the difference between an episodic and a serial storyline. A serial storyline can't be told in one installment. It carries over multiple episodes, and so you have to watch them all in order, and you have to watch multiple episodes to get the beginning, middle, and end of that storyline. An episodic storyline is a storyline that begins and has its middle and ends within a single episode. So most shows will have elements of both episodic and serial storylines. Serial storylines are more common in drama and TV dramas. They're much more predominant, whereas in sitcoms, most of them stay episodic because sitcoms you don't want the characters to fundamentally change, and you want you want the audience to be able to tune in for any episode and not have to have seen everything that came before it to follow what's going along. But within our TV dramas, you range from procedurals, which is medical dramas or legal dramas that usually have one case per episode that they're focusing on. That's an episodic storyline, but they will have some serialized storylines. Like if we looked at an episode of Castle, there's usually going to be one plot line within the episode that's the case that Castle and Beckett are solving. That has its middle and is resolved by the end of the episode. But there are serialized elements with Castle and Beckett and their relationship with one another and with the chief and with family. So those are things that carry from multiple episodes, but it's usually the smaller portion of the show. Then you go to something like How to Get Away with Murder, where the storyline slowly unfolds over the season. Maybe there's a case, so the case might have 50-50 balance in the episode, but this ongoing storyline of what's happening with the murder is slowly developing. So you kind of have to watch the series a little bit more religiously than Castle in order to follow it. And then you get shows like 24, which tend to have various storylines, but they're all serialized. So you have to watch the entire season in order to follow everything that goes along in the season and follow the whole plot. So you'll notice that the more serialized a show is, the more apt they are to include something at the beginning that's sort of like a recap of what happened last time. So you want to analyze how many plot lines are in each episode. is there the case of the week, and that's just like your A plot. And then we've got another plot line that follows the storyline of, you know, character B, and then you've got another storyline that involves somebody else. You want to kind of figure out how many there are and which ones are episodic and which ones are serial. Another thing you want to do when you're breaking down a show is try to get copies of the series scripts or Bibles. This website I've listed here for you, it's also included in lesson one, is a great resource for finding some scripts. They have a lot of pilots, so that's good. If shows have been on the air for several seasons, they typically will have, episodes from other seasons. So that's good too. The couple of things to watch out for though when you get copies of a series of produced series scripts is you want to watch out for transcripts and pilots. Transcripts, it's like somebody sitting at home who's watching the show and transcribing it. So they're not writing the document from which the show was created, they're taking the show and pulling the script from that. So that's a little bit tricky because it's not going to have the same formatting as the series might. It may not have the action written the same way that the series uses. Character names may not look the same. The other thing to keep aware of are pilots. One example that, from my experience, is I was writing a spec episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I found a copy of the pilot. And I thought, well, this is great. I can see what they call the characters. I can see how they formatted their scripts. Do they underline their scene headings? All that kind of stuff. What I didn't realize, though, is while every other network has sitcoms that operate on a 3-act structure and having like the 2 commercial breaks in the middle of an episode, Fox, which bought Brooklyn Nine-Nine, is the only that operates on a 4-act structure for half-hour shows. So they throw an extra commercial break in, which means that when I read the pilot script for Brooklyn Nine-Nine, it had 3 acts. And when I watched the pilot script for Brooklyn Nine-Nine on TV, it had 4. So you have to make sure you're kind of doing your due diligence, because you might run into something like that if all you have is the pilot. So if you have the pilot, you want to watch the pilot as well as read the script just to make sure it matches up, because it may have sold to a different network that has a different number of act breaks. All right. And then if you are going to spec a series that has been on the air for a while, you want to make sure that your episode idea hasn't already been done. And you want to get a sense of the types of storylines that they do. So let's say if we're going to write an episode of The Good Wife, that show's been on the air at least 5 years. So what we want to do, watching 5 years worth of The Good Wife is probably, a lot of time to commit. So what we could do instead is, in addition to watching recent episodes, go back through IMDb, which is the Internet Movie Database. It's imdb.com, and read through episode synopses that you can find them within each show, just to kind of see what happened in previous episodes and make sure that your idea hasn't already been done. And then you want to pay attention to things like how the characters speak within the series. What jargon, catchphrases, or slang do they use in their dialogue? What are their nicknames for the other characters? And how does their dialogue reflect their education or background? So if we have 2 detectives and one is cynical, is he always going to be asking questions and challenging? Is one from, the Midwest and one from the South? How might that impact the way they speak? Do certain characters start a lot of their sentences with prepositions? Pay attention to things like that, what various cadences are. Kind of learn how the character speaks so that when you sit down to write your dialogue for that character, it feels authentic to their voice. Okay, so you know which show you're going to spec, you've broken it down, you did all that work doing your research. how do you come up with an episode idea? In my experience, I feel like there's two ways that you can break a story. One way is through plot, and the other way is through theme. A plot's pretty self-evident. It's putting characters in the what if situation. So if we were going to write an episode of, let's say, Castle, what if Castle's daughter started dating a serial killer? That might spurn your episode. Or how would the characters react if, how would the characters at Seattle Grace Hospital on, or I think it's got a different name now, but how would the characters on Grey's Anatomy react if there was suddenly a terrorist attack in Seattle? So think about, you can break it from plot like that, or you can break a story from theme. So you can ask yourself, what's a theme or a question that you could explore in your episode? Ideally, theme and plot will work together in your episode, but you can also come up with the idea through theme. So you want to think, what's a theme or a question that could be explored? The Closer, it's now off the air, but that show used to do a fabulous job of having each season of the show be about a theme. So the theme was something like defining family. So whether it was the cases that they were taking on, the criminals that they were dealing with, or the things that were going on in characters' personal lives, everything had to deal with defining family in some way. So for your episode, you want to think, what's a question or a theme that could be explored? So maybe it's independence, or something like whether blood is thicker than water, or testing characters' limits, or putting duty before personal desire. But let's say we took independence and we wanted to come up with an episode idea for Grey's Anatomy. So we'd want to think, well, how can the topic or theme of independence be explored in our episode? Each episode, there's always a patient case. So maybe a patient case that involved independence. Maybe that's a teenage patient who wants to be medically emancipated so that they can make their own medical decisions. So maybe that's how we can infuse the patient case with independence. And then we think about the character personal lives. Maybe Meredith's children are exerting independence, or maybe she needs to find independence in her relationship with Derek. Or, excuse me, excuse me. Or maybe it's something to do with the business goings on at the hospital, or the doctors doing their duties at the hospital. So maybe it's one of the new residents getting their first solo surgery. So that would also deal with independence. So now you can start to figure out, how are these seemingly unrelated storylines within my episode, how can I tie them together? So they may not directly intersect, but they might. So maybe if Meredith is treating the teenage patient who wants her independence from her parents, maybe that infuses Meredith's storyline with her children by letting her let go of a little bit of her control over her children to give them some independence. So then, as you're thinking about all this, and you're coming up with the various storylines, you want to ask yourself what the characters' conflicts and stakes are. So if we had our patient who wants to be medically emancipated, obviously the conflict would be their parents, who have one idea of what patient care they need. Maybe the doctor has a different opinion, and maybe the teenager, him or herself, has different opinions. And you can add stakes by determining, what's that going to do to the relationships? How can we escalate the conflict and up the stakes throughout the episode? So maybe it just starts out initially that our teenager wants to be medically emancipated. And so she disagrees. Well, first she disagrees with her parents' plan for her medical care. So then she goes behind their back and tells the doctor something else. Well, then if her parents then find out and overrule her, what's the next thing she's going to do? How can we increase that conflict, up the stakes, and make her continue reacting? Valerie said the teenage patient doesn't want cancer treatment. and the parents know it would save her life. When she's 17, absolutely. That would be a really good conflict to explore in that episode. It's like, who knows what's best for that that person. So there's a lot of really rich material that you can pull by, exploring theme or giving yourself what ifs. I do an exercise with myself once a week where I call it bad logline Wednesdays. So every Wednesday, I sit down and I brainstorm 20 bad ideas. And whether I'm looking for a project to write, or whether I've decided I'm writing a spec episode of a show, or I'm working on my own pilot and coming up with episode ideas, um, I will tell myself, okay, I'm going to come up with 20 bad episode ideas and let myself have the freedom to write as badly as possible. And typically, if I'm having a hard time coming up with good ideas, doing the bad logline exercise will help me come up with ideas that kind of are out of my wheelhouse and maybe come across a little bit more fresh because I'm not censoring as much. So, whether it's coming up with good log lines or doing the bad log line exercise, it can be really fun just to brainstorm a bunch of different episodes this way. Then once you come up with your idea, you want to chart your plot lines. This is where it can be really good to use the grids. So I might say my A storyline, we've got our teenage patient, say our teaser actually starts here maybe. So we just label these instead of story A. Maybe I could just say this is the teenager. Story B, this would be Meredith. And story C, that might be the new resident doing the solo surgery. So maybe the new resident's solo surgery is on the teenager. So we can start to lay out our scenes and say, okay, the teenager, we're going to introduce the conflict in Act 1. Maybe she's the teaser because she gets sick, comes in with a broken leg. And so maybe Meredith treats her with the broken leg. So you could add that to Meredith's scene and then just kind of like build Meredith. So you've got all your plot points of each storyline. Then if you can see where they intersect, like when the teenager goes in for her surgery in Act 3, maybe that also ties in with the new resident's surgery. So you could color code these to indicate these are overlapping plot lines. So you don't have to use the plot templates, but they can be useful tools for you. Or if you have a method that works better for you, like using index cards, that works as well. So as you start to chart your pilots, chart your plot line, think about which character functions as the protagonist of that plot line. Then, to help you build your episode, write a log line for each individual plot line that indicates the trigger incident, which is whatever that inciting incident that starts the story rolling, the protagonist and their goal, the obstacles and conflict they encounter, and how it ends. And then you want to figure out, too, where this plot line can intersect with your other plot lines. Here's a sample story analysis from 24 Live Another Day. And so we're going to come up with our plotline protagonist. Let's say Mark Boudreau. He's the chief of staff. He's married to Audrey, who is Jack Bauer's former lover. So Mark is not the A storyline for 24 because Jack Bauer is always following the A storyline. But maybe the B storyline for the episode is Mark Boudreau and whatever he's going to do this episode. So a log line we might come up with for Mark for this episode and his storyline might be something like, when his wife, Audrey's former lover, resurfaces, Mark takes extreme measures to keep Jack from reuniting with Audrey, but his efforts to do so risk the safety of not just his marriage, but the entire nation. So this might intersect with the A plot, which is Jack attempting to thwart a terrorist attack. If Mark tells the Russians who are after Jack where to find him, and then that impedes Jack's ability to find the terrorist. So by Mark telling the Russians where to find Jack, it's advancing Mark's storyline by keeping his wife away from Jack, but it's also putting the nation at risk. So there's conflict in what he's doing, but you know, it may imply the ending. Uh, um, so yeah, so you can figure out how it intersects like that, but also I definitely encourage the log lines for each plot line within your episode. So we talked about the chart templates. You might also want to try doing an outline or a beat sheet for your episode. And you can do, whatever works best for you. But if you choose to do an outline, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can do an outline that outlines each act of the show. So you say act one and then write out your outline of what happens in act one and then act two and go chronologically. Or you can do an outline plot line by plot line. So I feel like the more your episode storylines intersect, the more you might want to go act by act. And just kind of keep us involved in all the storylines. But the less the storylines intersect, you might want to go storyline by storyline to tell us what happens, because maybe one storyline is episodic, it has its beginning, middle, and end, and you can tell it in a paragraph. Whereas another storyline, it's only covering, maybe one beat out of the hero's journey. Maybe it's a 10 episode arc, but we're only in episode 4. So maybe we're only covering one portion of it, and it would be easier to set it up that way. So if you do an outline, you might want to do either act by act, or you can do plot line by plot line. Another really cool tool of Final Draft that I want to make sure all you guys have at least seen is the index card function of Final Draft. So let's go back and open up our Brooklyn Nine-Nine spec here. Let's make it a little bit of more room on the screen. And the first thing we want to do is, if we've already got some of our script written, we can split the screen. And then by clicking one side of it, you can go under the View menu and choose Index Cards Summary. So what that's going to do, if your script's already written, it's going to create an index card for every single scene that's in the script already. So if you do Index Card Summary under your view, what it allows you to do is you can type in information into the index card that tell you things you need to know about the scene. So I might type in, okay, this is my inciting incident. Or if I'm doing revisions, I might want to say, do a dialogue pass. So we can set it up like this. But if you're building a script from scratch and you want to start a new script, you don't have to split your screen, but what you can do is just go under View, Index Card Summary, and start from scratch. And it's got a little icon here where you can add a new scene. So you can either add them all in and then fill them out, or you can go one by one. So maybe this is interior house day. And I know this is my, for some reason it's not letting me. Okay, and then maybe this one is, okay, my Final Draft's being a little buggy, but you can title all your slug lines. Acting up for me, sorry. But the cool thing is, once you've added these all in, then you can start to do different things with your navigator panel. So if you open up the one that looks like the movie clapboard, what that's going to do, oops, it's going to show you, sorry, I've got other things on my screen, that will, so you can see your scene heading here, and then you can change the color of it by doing this. So you might want to color code by storyline. So I might want to say all these scene cards are from Act 1, and all my Act 1 scenes are going to be in red. Or maybe you want to say these 2 scenes are from my A storyline, and these two are from my B storyline. So you can lay them all out, storyline by storyline, and then move them around. And the cool part is once you've put in a scene heading and you physically move the card around, the scene heading is, or the scene is physically going to move in the script. So it'll be a little easier to see if I showed you in this Brooklyn Nine-Nine spec. So take a look at this cold open scene right here. What I'm going to do for you, oops, if I click on the slug line here, it's supposed to take me to it here, but I can also get to my scene cards here. So this is my scene card here. I'm going to change the color to red just to help us pay attention to it. But if I now drag this scene card, if I put another one in front of it, it now moved this scene before this one. So it moved my establishing shot before the scene inside the bullpen. So it's pretty cool because you can just kind of move things around and reorder your script, which is really fun. I find it really useful to build your script this way, because if you get in all your scene headings and you make your script, then when you go back to you change the view back to script page view, your scene headings are already there. So you could outline your script with the index card function. Sorry. You could outline your script with the index card function and then completely wind up having your script laid out for you, all the scene headings in a row. So it can be a really good tool for you to use. You can also do other things with the scene cards by determining how big you want them to be. So if we wanted to say we want 4 cards across on a line, we can do that. We can also change the size of the font inside of them. There's different things you can do like that. And you can also print them out. So if you outlined in Final Draft and you actually want to have tangible cards that you can tack to a wall or something, you can print them out that way. And then there's also regular index cards, which are just as good. But you know, they don't automatically format themselves in you for Final Draft. So anyway, those are some tools. But when it comes time to writing a pilot, that's your own original pilot, all the same tools you use to spec an episode of another show can be used to write your own pilot. So pick a series that yours is going to be similar to, either in structure or tone, and then you want to break down that series, analyze it, and use the template that you've used from your analysis to set a template for your own series. So let's say you know you want to have a show that airs on ABC, and it's kind of similar to How to Get Away with Murder. So I'm going to break down an episode of How to Get Away with Murder because my show also uses flashbacks. So I'm going to use that as the template and then build my show using that template. So I have the right amount of act breaks. I see how they integrate their plot lines. Doesn't necessarily have to follow it verbatim, but it can help you kind of get a sense of what your episode needs to contain and what you should maybe think about doing for your series. And finally, now is the time when we can ask questions. So I'm going to open the mics back up. That was all I have for you this evening, but I'm happy to answer some questions. So if you have any, now's the time. Let me open these mics back up, and we're live. So anybody have any questions? Let's see. Are any of you interested in writing for television? Are you mostly film people? What are you guys interested in?
I
Okay,
was
now
originally interested in that, but I don't. I'm sorry. I didn't know exactly how to put my story together to make it good enough for a TV series, because I didn't know how the ideas would come up. I guess it was too flat to expand, so that's why I changed my story into a film, because in one of the classes, he just said it wasn't enough information yet to be a TV series.
Yeah. Well, you may find as you continue to build the film that it might might inspire a larger world to come from that. It is kind of
No, it
hard.
was totally different than
Yeah.
what it was now. Like I took out a lot of stuff because it just didn't make sense anymore.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, you definitely want to find the best format for your story. So whether that's whether it's telling it as a screenplay or telling it as a TV series. Um, I when I was taking my screenwriting program when I was studying, I had this idea, and my instructor said, "Don't write that. Don't write that as a film. It's totally a TV series idea." So you might not it might not be the right time for a particular idea, or maybe it needs a lot of world building done first because maybe you need to really do the character research and figure out, like, especially if your series is something where um, it's based around characters and not necessarily like a big um, plot hook. Like How to Get Away with Murder, it has kind of a hook. It's about, you know, a defense lawyer and her team of students who actually are involved in a murder. So not only are they trying to help their clients get away with murder, they're trying to help themselves get away with murder. So it's kind of high concept in that regard. Um, but you've got to then you take a show like maybe Brothers and Sisters, which really, didn't have a whole lot of plot set up to the series itself. The patriarch of a family died, and the family's brought back together. So, they run a vineyard or a produce company or something. So what really is the hook of that series? It's all about the characters. So it's something you want to think about in the world building, because you want to create really in-depth character bios and backstories and history. Not that you want to information dump with these characters when they appear, but you want to have characters that have rich enough lives that they can make an introduction in an episode, and you can pull for several seasons. You can pull episodes of different elements of their life out. You can really see those characters grow in that regard. Where if it's more plot driven, it might make an easier thing to see as a series. Like, we're going to create 24, which, it's got the high concept. It's all set in a 24-hour period about one guy who's the only guy who can stop a terrorist attack. And okay, so we kind of see where the season's going to go, and each season it's a new terrorist attack. Um, or you might want to think about, if it is a character, if it's more of a procedural, or is it going to be a case of the week? Is it going to be, um, more soapy in some ways? Um, and try to, look at the shows that are on the air and which ones are kind of lasting, and see if you can start to figure out in your mind why. Um, what's hot and why do you think that is?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, I thank everyone for being here this evening, and I'm looking forward to working with you this month. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.